Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm sorry, I was standing back there and we can't hear the speakers, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do, so I'm sorry. I just stood there. Many years ago, in a land far away called West Hollywood, I lived with a heroin addict, a practicing heroin addict for 2 years. That's how dumb I was. And I remember friends of mine saying, you know, Marianne, you should go to an Al-Anon meeting. And I said, you know, I'm a student of the Course in Miracles. I'm really embedded in the work of the Course. Let me, you know, there's only one truth, so let me just practice the Course in Miracles and really work this through. So about 6 months later, I took about 4 or 5 of my best friends and I sat them down and I said, this is what I've learned. This is what I've come to. This is what I've come to understand after 6 months. And they listened and I told them what I'd come to, and one of them said, you would have gotten that in 6 days at an Al-Anon meeting. You know, there is one truth, as I said, and it's spoken in many different ways. And one of the, for me, very exciting things about being a student of universal spiritual principles, comparative religion, and philosophy is that you know something's true because it so dovetails with everything else you know that's true. This truth with a capital T. For instance, when it comes to physical healing, Mary Baker Eddy and Christian Science. It's universal spiritual truth applied specifically to the issue of physical healing, just as AA, Al-Anon applied specifically to the issues that are, of course, on the table with addiction, etc. My last book actually is about food addiction and compulsion. And when I was writing the book, in the early stages of writing it, there was a conversation among me and publishers and people I was working with about whether the book should be about the general issues of compulsion and addictive behavior. And it was my belief then, and continues to be my belief, the book having been published and my working with people, that when it comes to drugs and alcohol, because of the prevalence of the 12-step programs, obviously, I think there is a mainstream understanding that a spiritual factor is absolutely necessary in genuine healing or recovery. But when it comes to food, the conversation in the United States anyway tends to be stuck on the level of diet and exercise. And for anybody who has a background with any kind of 12-step work, you know that it's not that diets don't work, it's not that exercise doesn't work. That's not the point. The point is the emotional and psychological and spiritual factors involved that can make it so difficult for the smartest person to stay on the diet or to resist putting the weight back on, even when some people have done the extraordinary things of losing, let's say, even hundreds of pounds, and I have met people like that. So I think that anything we do in this society that makes people know it's not just drugs, it's not just alcohol, it's not just living with an addict, it's the state of humanity. In a way, we are all addicted. I remember when George Bush said that the United States was addicted to oil. And at first, like I think many people, were so impressed because he got it. But then that wasn't followed by a conversation about what to do about it. Recognizing the insane behavior that you have perpetrated on yourself and others because of your addiction. Realizing the terrible defects in your own, in that case, national character that have developed because of our addiction. The ways that we have transgressed against others because of the addiction. So for me, I think, as I think for many of us, and when I first went through that issue with the heroin addict and all that kind of stuff, I realized that the Course in Miracles was, for me, 11th step work. This idea that through prayer and meditation, we gain conscious contact with God as we understand Him, that we improve our conscious contact with God as we understand Him. It's not enough to just recognize, obviously, the problem. The issue is, of course, getting into the solution. And the cunning nature, that insidious, really diabolical, if you're looking at it in theological terms. Addiction is diabolical. It is a moment of unconsciousness. And what anybody knows who knows the danger of taking that one drink, the danger of, that one needle, the danger of that one pill, or the danger of that one email, or the danger of that one conversation, the danger of that one mean comment, the danger of that one sandwich. I mean, this is really diabolical. stuff, because what's being said here is you could get it right all day. You could get it right all week. You could get it right all year. You could get it right for a decade, and in one moment, you're held hostage. You know, the Course in Miracles says in every moment, we are either host to God or hostage to the ego. It's kind of like Little Red Riding Hood when she's going through the jungle. All of us are Little Red Riding Hood, and we are sent by the divine grandmother, right? And we have to go through the jungle. We have to go through those woods, those dark woods. And those dark woods are, well, one tree is your relationship with your father, and one wild animal is your relationship with your mother, and all the things that we encounter in those dark, dark woods. And the big bad wolf doesn't say, hi, I'm the big bad wolf. It doesn't say, hi, I'm your self-hatred. Hi, I'm your self-loathing embodied. Rather, it says, no, I'm this nice old lady. This will make you feel better. Come on, it's just one. This is how you think, and you should communicate that to this person, or whatever it is. It never comes saying, hi, I'm your addiction talking. It doesn't say that. Other people can see that it's your addiction talking. Other people can see that you're acting out. But at that moment, and that's what makes it truly so deep and dark, at that moment, we feel more self-righteous. We think we're just being righteous, but that difference between righteous, which means right use of the mind, is the opposite of self-righteous. In that moment, have you ever felt more sure of yourself than in the moments when you were making the worst mistake of your life sometimes? You know, and then other people will say, you know, for me, it's that other people will say, well, you just seemed so sure. I'll say, why didn't you say anything? You just seemed so sure. And I've said to my best friends, that's when you need to shake me by the shoulder. Because that level of certainty is the enemy of truth, isn't it? That level of certainty. And that's what I think the 12 Steps gives us. That's what A Course in Miracles gives us. It gives us the humility of knowing for the rest of our lives. Or you could be wrong. You could be wrong. You know, I think that in any serious spiritual path, that's part of our daily practice, to know you have messed up before. You have messed up before. And when you messed up in a way that hurt yourself, that damaged you, that damaged others. That's why those earlier steps, when we have to take that fearless, and it does take courage. I did that. Yep, you did that. I did that. Yep, you did that. I hurt myself that way. Yes. I hurt others that way. Yep. That kind of humility to know, it's almost like knowing that we carry within ourselves a nuclear bomb. You know, I think that one of the things I appreciate about the 12 Steps, that I appreciate about any spiritual path, what I think is true of any holy work, is that you come not only to love, to embrace the power of God to heal you, but you come to recognize that the darkness is itself what you might call a worthy adversary. It's serious, serious stuff. And when you realize that this has been alive within you, and is alive in us until that moment when we become perfect enlightened masters. And I can't, and I don't know if anybody in this room can speak from that place. So until we're in that place, we live with that deep humility. And that's part of the gift. You know, when they say in this program, every problem comes bearing its own solution. It comes bearing its own solution because the solution is living in such a deeply humble place to know that in any given moment that you are not in conscious contact with God, you might blow it in ways that have serious consequences for an entire lifetime. Do not kid yourself. This is real life here. And when you're young, you don't know, because when you're young, you don't realize that. When you're young, you don't necessarily think you don't have a gazillion more choices and chances. But the older we get, the more we know, you learn what regret is. And that's what the addict, that's what the AALA member, that's what anybody on a serious spiritual path comes to understand, is the remorse and the regret of having to face the places, no, you blew that one. You blew that one. And where do you go from that? And where you go from that, I think, and this is where, for me, the 11th step matters so much, you go to a place of knowing, if I wake up in the morning and I do not pray, I do not meditate. You know, a lot of people talk about God. Sometimes I will, and that's not the 11th step. It says through prayer and meditation. It doesn't say through theological discussion. It says through prayer and meditation. It doesn't say through your intellectually knowing that all things are in God's hands. You know, sometimes I'll say to people who talk to me about their problems, and I'll say, well, did you pray about it? And I can't tell you how often somebody will say to me, oh, no, believe me, I know it's in God's hands. I said, that's so not what I asked. I didn't ask, do you know if it's in God's hands? That's pretty easy to know it's in God's hands. You can know it's in God's hands and stick a needle in your arm. You can know it's in God's hands and take that drink. You can know it's in God's hands and make that completely stupid, self-sabotaging comment. You can know it's in God's hands. But what prayer and meditation do is it literally shifts our brain waves. It literally shifts our brain waves. You know, the Course in Miracles says 5 minutes spent with the Holy Spirit in the morning is enough to guarantee He will be in charge of our thought forms throughout the day. It's interesting to me. Freud said intelligence will be used in the service of the neurosis. I mean, many 12-step meetings are filled with smart people, you know, who we understand you're just another drunk in here. And that level of humility where we come to that place of understanding that not only could I blow it on any day that I don't make sure that I have actually done the work of the conscious contact, not known how important conscious contact is. I don't leave my house in the morning knowing it's important to take a shower. Right? I take a shower, and I make time to take that shower because I don't want yesterday's dirt on my body as I go out into the day. But if I don't pray and I don't meditate in the morning, what that means is that I'm taking yesterday's stress out into the day. And if I wake up in the morning, as most Americans do, certainly, and we don't purify our thoughts, the Course in Miracles says miracles are everyone's right, but purification is necessary first. If I don't do that prayer and meditation in the morning, if I don't do it, I'm not only walking out into the day with yesterday's stress, given the fact that if that's my consciousness, I probably also have read the newspaper or listened to the news on the radio or the TV. So I'm not just carrying my stress, I'm carrying the stress of people in Afghanistan and people in Iraq and people in Washington. I'm carrying the stress of millions of people. And for anyone, not only the addict though, because this is universal, for anyone who is heir to the thought system of this planet, which is one in which we are addicted to fear, right? Then what happens is that fear being my fallback position. If you're a food addict, we know what you do in your fallback position, what you do with that stress. If I'm going to walk out into the day with that stress, then it is very likely that by noon I will have done whatever I do with stress. And when you know that about yourself, that in that moment of stress, if we have not developed the capacity to deal serenely, it's not that the stress is going to go away, and that's certainly the Al-Anon issue. It's not that that situation is necessarily going to go away today. It's not that that factor is necessarily going to be gone today. It's that we are going to dwell differently within the circumstance. And to know that in any given moment that we do not proactively, through prayer and meditation, not through just up here. The Course in Miracles says enlightenment is a journey without distance from here to here. If I don't stand within a certain place within myself, which is what the 12 steps do for us, which is what the Course in Miracles does for us, which is what any serious spiritual practice does. But that's the difference because, like the Course in Miracles says, the workbook is the crux of the Course. Why? Because it is the actual psychological mind training. That's why the 12 steps are the crux. You know, when people aren't actually doing the steps. It's all up here, and we can be very good at it. And that's part of the wolf pretending to be, you know, the nice old grandmother, because the ego loves to talk about religion. The ego loves to talk 12 steps. It's hip, it's kind of trendy, it's kind of cool. That has absolutely nothing to do, well, I wouldn't say it has nothing to do, but it is no more than the invitation to do the work that we all know is the actual work of living in a place where it is less probable that we will blow it today. You know, God has created the infinite possibilities. And that's what, you know, I always say there are two words that you don't know until you've been there. You know them. You've heard them. You know what the dictionary says. You know what they mean. But you don't really know what they mean until you've been there. And one is betrayal and one is mercy. And if you're in a 12-step program, or once again, by extension, you've lived, you know, most people belong in one even if they aren't in one. Because it is the state of mankind, right? Then you know what mercy means. You mean I did that and I got another chance? You mean I wasted that many years and I got another chance? You mean I blew that many opportunities and I get another chance? And you get what kind of God is so infinite in mercy that would be true. But then that's also why, in the 12th step, you get that, you know, I felt this with my career. People say, where did your career come from? And I don't usually say this because it's not within a conversation people would understand it. My career is my sentence. You will spend the rest of your life doing what you can to make sure other people aren't as stupid as you were. Right? Right? And that's that 12th step. You only get to keep it by giving it away. You know, I always say my work is not about trying to get a message out. It's about trying to get a message in. But the only way you can get the message in is to help someone else who might want it to get it in. You know, I was once, it's fascinating to me how suffering gives you X-ray vision into the suffering of others. I dated a Vietnam vet once who had this unbelievable ability to recognize other Vietnam vets. And we walked into this reception once, and he said to me, "See that guy over there?" I said, "Yeah." He said he was a Nam. I said, "Oh, come on. I mean, do you know him?" He says, "No, I don't know him." I said, "Well, how do you know?" He said, "I'm telling you, watch this." And he just went over to the man, and he said, "Where were you?" And within 10 seconds, they were melted in each other's arms. He knew. And when you have been into that place where you have taken the fearless, and it does take courage, doesn't it? There's nothing, you know, that takes more courage in a way. And you've seen your own stuff. You know, sometimes I'll be about to judge somebody, particularly young people, particularly young women. And that's the one that's always like, I just guffaw at myself. I'll be about to judge a younger woman for her irresponsible behavior or what I see as whatever, and I'll go, "Excuse me. Excuse me. Look at yours and tell me it wasn't worse." Right? So in living in that place, something new opens up. It's like a new world. It's like the movie Splash, where you realize that under there, you know, I remember for myself when I went through this terrible situation in my life, and then I realized, well, have other people suffered this much? I mean, that's that 12th step. You realize other people are suffering now as you suffer. And you realize, have other people been going through things this deep? I was saying yesterday, I was talking at this thing down in Orange County. It was actually very interesting. And there was this young woman who said, how do we get across to the people who are the major CEOs and politicians who are polluting the planet or whatever? And I pointed out a line from Martin Luther King. You have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. If you're in a place of judging other people because they shouldn't be that way, you have no voice with them. And one of the things that I said to her was, for all you know, I said, your spiritual job in that moment, if you're even thinking, how do I get the message across to other people who just don't understand what I understand, which is the opposite, of course, of attraction versus promotion, right? Then your job in that moment is not to say, dear God, how do I get the truth to them? But rather, dear God, please take away my unbelievable spiritual superiority and self-righteousness. That is your job in that moment. And the world, so much evil has been perpetrated on the planet and is being perpetrated as we speak by people who think they know. And if only they could make them know the way they know, everything would be fine. No, that's not what it is. It's you just live in the space of I know. You live in the space of what you know. And you become, I always point out at my lectures that when you see statues of Jesus or statues of Buddha, and they're like this. Now, you never see a Buddha or a Jesus. Right? Because this says two things. Number one, I am undefended. And number two, come unto me. Come here. Come here. And that's that attraction. You're not trying to tell them. Who are you to tell them? But you're here if they want to talk. And whether it's whatever it is in life. But when we go to that place, then we realize that the wound itself is a sacred wound. Because when I got, have other people suffered as much as I have, it was like the heavens opened up, and it was like I practically heard the heavens singing, oh, they were suffering. You didn't notice you were shopping. You know that your brain was somewhere else. And you come to realize ultimately that you're suffering. And this is that whole way that mercy is built into the nature of the universe. You realize not only is my suffering shared by others, but if it took my suffering to get to the point where I could understand that, then this was my sacred wound. This is what got me here. If this is what it took for me to be able to stand and have that X-ray vision into other people, like my friend knew that about the Vietnam vet, he just knew it. He just knew it. And when we have been in that ground where it takes you flat down, that you are, it's so much, you have to get that you're no better than others, to get that you're no worse than others. And I do think that if there's a shadow, not to the 12 steps, I don't think there's a shadow to the 12 steps. The 12 steps, I believe, and I think others probably here agree with me, I see the 12 steps themselves like the Course in Miracles, straight from God. There is no shadow. It's profound light. But whether you're talking about the Course in Miracles, or you're talking about AA, or you're talking about anything else, there's the stuff that builds up around it. The shadow of the seeker, right? And I do think that if there's any sort of shadow to sometimes in the 12 steps, it's this belief that somehow my suffering is worse than others. My suffering is special. My suffering is somehow more important. Because, you have a lot of people who say, hi, I really dig you because of the form of your suffering. Right? And I think that's really important. I think that's really important what I've seen with food addicts and people who are dealing with compulsivity in food, because it's so cruel. It's so cruel that way. And there is a belief that you're more messed up than other people because it shows on the outside. Right? When we get to the point of really realizing, to me, that level of humility, for me, is you're no better than anybody else and you're no worse than anybody else. You haven't suffered more. I mean, if you just look at it statistically, if you're sitting in this room, given what this event is, it's reasonable to assume that the person next to you has suffered as much as you have. But what I submit to you is you could be in any room, anywhere, and actually, statistically, it is reasonable to assume that somebody next to you has suffered as much as anyone else. And that's what I said to the young woman who says, how do we get across to the CEOs, et cetera? I said, how do you know that CEO who you were seeing as such, you were judging as such a Neanderthal, that their son didn't die of a heroin overdose 2 weeks ago? I mean, if anything, that's what my career has taught me, is that, and that's what, of course, the rooms is clear. You have a homeless person next to a mogul. And that's the level of an AA meeting. That's the level of the Course in Miracles. That's the level of any spiritual soul work. It's down where we live. It so has nothing to do with how much money people have or how much worldly power people have. It's that bedrock place. And when we live from that bedrock place, and the counterintuitive, ironic brilliance of it all is that when you've been down to that deep, dark place within yourself and looked at it, you know how it is with any of this work. You avoid it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. No, I'm not an alcoholic. No, I don't want to hear it. No, I don't have that problem. No, I don't have that problem. And then until you you have all of your defenses marshaled against realizing it and admitting it and acknowledging it. And then once you get there, it's the biggest relief in the world. Right? It's the biggest relief in the world, realizing I was afraid of this. I was afraid of God's arms around me. I was afraid of God telling me that He loved me anyway. I was afraid of God saying, not only do I love you anyway, my love, and this is in the book of Isaiah, by the way, this is expressed in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, that for His sake, not for your sake, that I love you so much that for my sake, I'm going to lift you up from this. Because unlike you, I cannot turn my back on the child of my womb, which is pretty profound for women, by the way. So the idea that we have been that down, and that gives us the miraculous power to help somebody else get back up. Not unless they ask, not unless they want it, not from a place that I have it now and I can give it to you. Because if we're in that place, I have it now and I can give it to you, in that moment I don't have it. Because in that moment I've separated myself from you, thought I was better than you, so in that moment I have nothing to give you actually. But if I'm in just this place, and you believe in a self-organizing universe, then those who need to find you will find you. And in that 12th step, where it says we will give this to others, that you will live the rest of your life. And the whole point is of keep coming back, the whole point of doing the workbook in the course, the whole point of any of this spiritual practice is you cannot afford to go a day without it. I mean, if you look at the days that you've made huge mistakes, I know in my life, I didn't wake up that morning thinking I was going to make that big mistake that day. You don't wake up in the morning, I think I'll be a jerk today. I think I'll use today. You don't do that. You wake up and it comes literally from left field. And that is, it's interesting. It's called, the miracles come from out of the blue meaning the spiritual. The mistakes come from out of left field, meaning when the left brain is in charge, but your soul is sort of left out. Because like I said, you make your biggest mistakes thinking at the moment, oh, this is smart. Right? For some, you have some reason why this is this is the right thing to do. Right? And then it came, and you come to realize that in the morning, you say to God, you know and I know, that if you're not with me today, if my conscious contact isn't going on, if I'm not aligned in a way that the intellect cannot affect, only prayer and meditation can affect. If I don't actually do this practice through prayer, through meditation, which is once again why I always say about the Course in Miracles, I find it 11-step work. I feel that's just like it. There are different metaphysical truths that hone in on a particular place in our brokenness. Then the probability is that I will blow it today. And I might not have blown it for 20 years. I might not have blown it for 40 years. But that thief, the thief of addiction, the thief of compulsivity is like a very slow, it just will encircle your house. Just encircles your house. It's not even trying to rush you. It's just going to wait. It's just going to go like this because it knows that someday, in some moment, you'll be stressed out enough to open a window or open a door. And what something like 12 steps makes us recognize, as does the Course, as does any serious spiritual truth, is that the thief has been on this planet for millions of years in time as we know it. There has been no mass awakening from this insanity. Theoretically, we are on the earth, initiating it now, but in terms of our daily lives, hello, we're here now. And that thief on any given day, that we do not proactively say, God, take my life today. God, use me today. There's no such thing as a neutral thought. And that's what we were raised with. We were raised, well, I'm not trying to help anybody, David. I'm not trying to hurt anybody. I went to a conscious capitalism conference a couple of weeks ago. I know, there is an oxymoronic element. But that has to change. And There's a very serious subject on the planet right now. We have to talk about we have to get into the solution, definitely, on that one. And there are people coming at conscious business and all kinds of wonderful things, actually. Adam Smith, the primary architect of free market capitalism, said free market capitalism cannot exist outside an ethical context. And it has lost its ethical center. Certainly American capitalism has lost its ethical center, undoubtedly, in the last 4 to 5 decades, no doubt about it. And having lost its, considering the fact that capitalism, and particularly American capitalism, has such extraordinary financial and political influence throughout the world, for that institutional vortex to have lost its center, its righteousness, its ethics, is very not only destructive but dangerous if you believe in cause and effect. Perilous. And going back to what George Bush, it's all part of that addicted to oil thing. That's why, one of the reasons why American capitalism lost its ethical center. Because if you're addicted to the money, you're addicted to the oil, nothing comes first. Nothing comes first. People say, how did you get away from the heroin? I tell you, the moment it happened for me was the moment when I saw him in my mother's purse. That was it. That was it. Stealing a $5 bill from my mother's purse who was visiting. So what happens is, if you're an addict, and that's why, because we're addicted to the oil, we're addicted to the money, we're addicted to the standard of living, we will put our perceived need for this above all things that are holy and good and truly, and this is where we're living as a national identity. So that's why, even in one of my lectures, we 12-step the United States. That's one of the values of knowing the 12 steps, is that, and I think part of the 12th step itself, which is you're not only available to other addicts because of what you know, you're available to the world because of what you know. In the metaphysical tradition, it says about the Jews that they're God's lending library. And I think that that's true of anybody on a deep spiritual path. You're God's lending library. And that was speaking about the spiritual ray of blah, blah, blah. That when you know something like the 12 steps, you have information. And when I say information, I don't just mean information up here. I mean information in here. And once you've lived it, every addict or every person who's, an addict, every person who's seen that aspect of self where the compulsive or addictive behavior made you not yourself. And you acted on that. And it had real effects in your life and the lives of others. Once you have been in that place, it's like the prodigal son. And that's what doing the 12 steps is an example, or any holy spiritual work, is an example of the prodigal son imagery, where it says the father is more excited to see the son who left and came back than the son who never even left. That's why people in recovery have something. Just have something. This been to hell and back stuff. And it's not only been to hell and back, it's the humility of knowing, and if I'm not careful today, I will go to hell again. And I really don't want to. I really don't want to. And I know that one of the reasons I will say out of hell is really being compassionate towards you in your journey, and knowing that you yourself are dealing with what I'm dealing with, which is, please, dear God, don't let me be in hell today. Not that God sent you. God is who delivers us from hell. It's the addiction that sends us to the hell. So what I said in this conscious capitalism, and by the way, I did not pull it off perfectly. And the reason I didn't pull it off perfectly was because I'm used to speaking to people who are already in my conversation. And so I think I came across, to people who know that conversation, it was like, yes. To people who didn't, I think I came across kind of arrogant and condescending, and I can see why. Because my point was, yes, it's true that much of the advancements of human civilization, and Western particularly, have come from American capitalism, but also some of the extraordinary damage that has come to human civilization and the planet itself has been brought forth by American capitalism. Yes, we need American capitalism if we're going to get out of here alive, but also we have to be careful, because the misuse and the unethical expression of American capitalism could kill us faster. So American capitalism needs to take a fearless moral inventory. American capitalism needs to recognize its own character defects. I mean, like the United States, what is a character defect? We'll go into any country and do anything that gets us what we think we need. That's horrifying. That's horrifying to understand about that. When I was at this event yesterday, there were all these young people, and it was like really, it looked like being at Woodstock. And everybody, it was like so weird. It was like deja vu, because I'm such a child of the 60s, and the way the girls were dressed and the way the guys were dressed, it was all being, you know, really like counterculture. And I think in a certain way, the older you are, the more you know. And I think in another way, the younger you are, the more you know. And I was thinking and looking at these people. I said, is there anything political going on here? And they said, no. We're just here, people living in the light, man. We're just living in the light. And we're just ready to transcend. And I shared, because I saw that, you know, my father told me, my father was a lawyer, and he always said, speak to the smartest person on the jury. And that has never failed me. I've always known in my career that I always wanted to, I know I used to go to cabaret clubs in New York all the time when I lived there when I was a young woman. And sometimes the audience would go wild, and I didn't even think the person was very good. And other times I thought the person was extraordinary, but I seemed to be the only person in the audience who thought that. And in my own work, in my own career, I got years ago, I want to give a talk that if I were sitting there, I would like it, you know? So when my dad said, always speak to the smartest person in the audience, there's something powerful about speaking you know, there's a line in metaphysics that virtue is its own reward. What you get from anything is just the joy of doing it, including the love of truth, whether it's 12 steps or any others. So this idea of taking, so what I was saying to these young people yesterday was that this is beautiful here, but I just want to point out that when this same scene was occurring in the 1960s, there was something very, very potent at the middle of it. And that is that we were trying to stop, by the way, and did stop a war. And that today, we have got so many Americans who don't even have a historical memory of a time when America's war machine was not dominating our budget and in too many ways our planet. So it's so ubiquitous for them that they've been desensitized to any kind of thought that they even could change it. And therefore, there is no appropriate moaning and groaning. And that is what I think 12 Steps teaches us. I really did this? Oh my God, that really happened? Well, America needs to know that. Oh my God, we did this? That really happened? I remember when Robert McNamara said, before he died, he said, the Vietnam War was a huge mistake. Remember, Clinton was president. He said America was a huge mistake. 57,000 Americans died. Millions of others died. How many orphans? I mean, it's so horrifying, the effects. It was a huge mistake. Well, if America was spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically in tune with itself, we would have stopped everything for 3 days. Businesses would have closed, banks would have closed, everything would have closed, just to scream into our pillow and admit the horror of the realization. And that is what I think, with that fearless moral inventory, and with that, you have to look at it. What have you become? What have you done? What has gone on here? And then you become someone who can stand in the place of the transformation of it. So I think that from a 12-step perspective, for me, it's not even just a matter that now that you have been awakened in whatever way you've been awakened, you can help other alcoholics, or you can help other people who are in Al-Anon or have addicts for children or family. It's bigger than that. Because anything that is a serious spiritual truth is a serious spiritual truth about everything. You can stand in front of any human being, and if you have been transformed in some way, not that you think you've been transformed for all time, because the power is knowing that if I don't proactively give my life today, I could blow it again today. But that is part of the transformation, is knowing that. That part of humility is knowing that. You become a transformational element for everyone you meet. Because today, it's really, to be honest, what good is it going to do for us if a bunch of people have gotten sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, aren't drinking, aren't taking drugs, aren't overeating or whatever, but a nuclear bomb goes off? Do you know what I'm saying? So it's not just the addiction of our addiction to drugs. It's not just our addiction to people, or to love, or to sex, or to food, or to any specific thing that you and I see as addicted to. It's addiction, period. It's the fact that the ego is that addiction, is that overwhelming, compulsive drive that overrides our better knowing, overrides our intelligence, overrides our discipline, overrides our self-will, and like a breaker switch. It's like a breaker switch that has been flipped over, and we have to flip it back. And we get to that realization, only God can do that. Because intelligence will be used in the service of the neurosis. We have all these laws on this planet. And yet, look, there were the Titanic on the way to the iceberg. The iceberg could be nuclear, the iceberg could be water wars, the iceberg could be food contamination. There's so many forms. So anybody who is grounded in something like the 12 steps, anybody who is grounded in our own hell, in our own having been there, in our own descent, in our own realization. You know, I had a moment when early in my career, back in the 1980s, and some of you might have even been in the room because I see some old friends here. It was a Saturday morning at that church on the St. Thomas Church, Episcopal. And there was a woman, and there were a lot of like homeless people and stuff who would be at that church. And she was standing in the back of the room, and she yelled out. It was fine. And then I can't remember the specifics. She yelled out again, and it got to the point where she was chronically behaving in a way that would mess with what we were doing there. And I can't remember what I said, but I made some joke. The whole room laughed. It was clearly at her expense, though, and her face just dropped, and she walked out of the room. And on one hand, I had handled the situation. On the other hand, I had hurt her feelings. The next Saturday morning, I came in to give a talk. I went to the microphone, and it was like I heard a voice in my head, and it said, apologize for what you said to Gladys. It was either apologize for what you said to Gladys, or I think it was about apologize for what you said about Gladys. And it was like, my thought was, first of all, there are people here who weren't even here last Saturday. They have no idea. Not only that, there are people who are here who don't remember. And so why stir it up? Why remind them of the mistake that I made? So I decided to ignore that little voice in my head. And I just went up to open my mouth, and it was like I saw this vision, like when you see snow on a television. I haven't seen snow on a television set in a long time, but you know when we just go to snow? And I heard that same voice say, there will be no lecture until you apologize for what you said about Gladys. You know, we're all the faucets. We're not the water. The Course in Miracles says all of the children of God are special, and none of the children of God are special. And there's nothing like having blown it really badly to teach you that. There's nothing like having fallen to the floor. There's nothing like having been down there. And it doesn't make us special, but it makes us open to the power which is the most special of all. And it makes us disciples. That's what 12 steps are. They're a discipline. And the word inside the word discipline is the word disciple. And we begin to see that these things are, as Jean Houston says, our sacred wound. And we do have something, having had our lives transformed through these 12 steps, through these programs. We can help others in a way that perhaps we could not have before. Having been transformed, we become, to the extent to which we stand within that space of transformation, transformational elements in our own lives. And at this time on the planet, you realize, you know, just like Werner Erhard used to point out that peacock feathers came from the fact that peacocks ate thorns. Your addiction is your thorn. Your addiction is your thorn. That's what they are. This was my thorn out of which peacock feathers have emerged. That's how you feel. You get that I ate thorns. And yet that thorn becomes your peacock feather in that you understand. You understand the pain of people. You understand the fragility of people. You understand the brokenness of people. And that's why, like I said, even though, you know, the other day I give myself a B. I was right when I said American capitalism has to atone for its own sins. American capitalism has to atone for its own defects. American capitalism has to atone that there's a difference between taking blame and taking responsibility. But I, in terms of my own practice, I had a little arrogance going on towards some of these corporate chieftains, and I missed the opportunity, I think, to get to a few people because I came across like, well, I know and you don't, or I was judgmental towards them. My bad. So we have to practice it. It's in our practice that we give it, etc. I'm not saying anything that you don't already know. But like anybody at this point, of Generation of Spiritual Seekers, 12 Steps or otherwise, you don't come to an event like this to hear something you don't already know. We're all here to access more deeply those things which by now all of us already know, but we know. But the Course in Miracles says ideas grow stronger through being shared. And that's what the 12 steps are all about. You can't do it yourself. You can't do it alone. You got to sit in that room with people and hear that symphonic thing that happens when they say it and then they say it and they say it. It's all the same thing and yet it's all a little different. It's the same symphony, but that person was the oboe and that person was the violin. And it's this symphonic field. You know, there is it's said in a lot of the old metaphysical lore that the ways that the pyramids were built is that the ancients knew how to use sound. They knew how to use tone, intonation in a way that actually created an anti-gravitational field. This is why music makes us happy. It literally lifts up the vibrations, right? So what's happening now is, as I said, we're on the ship and we're headed towards the iceberg. We have to turn this thing around. In history, the Titanic did turn, but it turned too late. By the time it turned, it would have been better off not turning. We have to turn this thing around. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to turn it around fast. And that means that we have to take the probability vectors for the next 20 years, which are grim indeed, and turn them into possibility. God has created the infinite possibilities, but it's our job to create the new probabilities. And I know in my life, and I assume in yours as well, if anybody ever says to me, wow, you have some talent, you have some expertise, you have some ability to really help, you know, I shifted from a probability to a possibility when you were talking or whatever. And whenever anybody has ever said to me, how do you do that? I know deep in my heart the answer is I went so far down that I saw way, way up. And that's why we're all here. That force which holds us accountable when we have gone way, way, way down, then gives us wings and we go way, way up. And I acknowledge I'm happy for you, for myself, for all of us who feel that, wow, we have some moments now that are way, way up. But I also say to you with all sincerity as your fellow citizen on the planet today, it's not enough for just us to be way, way up. We have to turn this Titanic around. We have to now create a field of possibility turned probability, which is what this meeting is about, which is what every AA meeting is about, but which affects the consciousness when we leave that knowing, wow, I'm a lending library to the entire world now. May others not suffer as I have suffered. May others not make the mistakes that I have made. And if and when they do, may they feel in me the same otherworldly compassion that God has shown me. And together we will do more than save an alcoholic. We will save the world. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.